I can figure out how to turn off the transcript. All right, everyone. Thanks for bearing with me there for a moment to turn off the transcription. But my name is Mark Cooper. I'm the director of the U.S. Department of Commerce here in Indiana. I am part and executive secretary of the Indiana District Export Council. The Export Council will be described by one of our presenters today and a DEC member as well. But my job is to welcome you to the Lunch and Learn and do a few housekeeping issues as people continue to join. As far as webinar protocol, if you are not speaking, please make sure your mic is muted. We don't need to hear the Captain Crunch in the background. So we appreciate that. And also, if you would have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. There's a chat function as a part of Teams. So if you have a question for one of our presenters, please feel free to do that. Again, this is part of our Lunch and Learn series. I'm part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, an agency of the federal government. Our job is to help U.S. companies and specifically Indiana companies export and market and grow their products to international markets. I'm connected to all the U.S. embassies around the world. We have a staff of 3 here in Indiana that supports the export community. Without any further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone and the webinar dais to my friend and colleague, Colin Rank, who is going to provide some opening comments and then start our presentation. So Colin, I'm going to turn it to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cooper. Hello, everyone. My name is Colin Rank. I am the Vice President of Client and Partner Services here at the International Center. Delighted to have you all here. So as an honorary official member of the District Export Council here in Indiana, I have to give my obligatory statement summarizing what the District Export Council is all about. So a brief description of us. The Indiana DEC, which is the District Export Council, is a not-for-profit organization under the auspices of the U.S. Department of Commerce to promote and support exporting as a way to strengthen Indiana companies, to grow the state's economy, and of course, to create jobs. So we offer one-on-one export counseling, we offer workshops, in-person events, and webinars that serve as a focal point for export information and resources for companies throughout Indiana. So each state has an export council. Some states actually have more than one, like California. But if you haven't already visited our website, it's indianadec.org. So thank you as always to our collaborative partners, including the U.S. Department of Commerce, the SBA, Exim Bank, IU Cyber, Indiana SBDC, the Indy Chamber, and of course the International Center, which I'm a part of. So already patting myself on the back here. This is our 4th Export Lunch and Learn 2023, and these webinars are offered every other month from January to November. So we will share a little bit more information about our November program with you at the end of today's program. So why are we here? So who is the International Center? Well, for the past 50 years, the International Center, which is based in Indianapolis, really takes Indiana to the world and the world to Indiana. So we advise both domestic companies and international companies on intercultural communication, on protocol and professional development. And one of the really cool things that we have is a pretty multifaceted relocations department, which helps the international expatriates that move to Indiana help find homes, schools, and adapt to Hoosier culture. So what we're going to be talking today is part of kind of our bread and butter, international communications and protocol. So real quick about me, I joined the center in 2022, so I am fairly a newbie there. But for 10 years beforehand, I ran a chamber of commerce between Indiana and China. So helping lots of Chinese companies come to Indiana and then vice versa as well. So lots of great examples today that we can kind of cite as issues, especially when it comes to business communications and how important that is moving forward. So to preface everything, if we can move on to the next slide. So what we're going to first talk about today, kind of how the order of operations is, I'm going to share a little bit about culture mapping. And culture mapping was put together by a professor named Erin Meyer, who's a professor at France's INSEAD Business School. And what she did is she highlighted the cultural differences in business communications throughout the world. So she surveyed thousands and thousands of business executives. And what we're going to do is kind of map all of these different things out. So we can compare and contrast where the US fits in to a lot of these different things. So one thing that I want to preface is these are mean scores, right? So there's always going to be outliers. So a good example you can see on our first slide here, Chinese typically are very high context, Americans are very low context. So that means that they use kind of sophisticated language, but some of my colleagues in China, I remember one that actually used to work at the International Center, sometimes would say, "Hey, Colin, you're looking fat today." It's like very unusual to hear from a Chinese person. So people can be direct no matter where they're from. So again, this is really meant to inform in general terms. Just understand that there's individual variability here. So the other little bit of housekeeping is please, 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 if you have any questions throughout this entire program, please enter them into the chat feature. I'd rather address them as we're talking about them rather than wait till the end, but we will have some time to do Q&A here right at the end. So with that, I will get started. So the first dimension that we're going to talk about today is communication and communicating throughout the world. So this spectrum here is really focused on low context and high context. So what does that mean? So low context is very precise, it's very simple, it's very clear, it's very American. So messages are expressed and understood at face value, and repetition is appreciated if it helps clarify the communication. Whereas high context, which you'll see on the far right, is good communication is sophisticated, it's nuanced, it's layered. So messages are both spoken and read between the lines, and messages are often implied but not plainly expressed. So a good example that I can give of this is marriage. Okay, so if anyone has, newlyweds or, has a new boyfriend or girlfriend and you're still getting to know them, you have to be very upfront with kind of how you're thinking and how you're feeling of things. And then you have those old timers that have been married for decades, and you could just give your partner a look. You sort of understand, oh, they're mad, they don't like that. So that's an example of a very high context situation, a very high text communication, that even the subtlest of cues can have very deeper meaning. So think of body language, think of those unwritten rules. So one of the issues that we see a lot of here, U.S. being so low context and a lot of our Asian cultures are being a very high context, is that in these high context markets, yes doesn't always mean yes. And I can't emphasize enough how much I saw that when working with the American-China Society of Indiana, that Chamber of Commerce between Indiana and China, because eventually I would see a lot of Americans go out to China, then come back and say, "Colin, so excited, we got the contract, we got the deal." And I would say, "Well, explain, what did you mean by that?" "Well, it was great. Like, I just explained what we were doing and they just said yes to everything." It's like, so yes means I heard you. It doesn't mean I agree or that I want to move forward with that. And even with this comes the problem of saying no, and being very indirect about it. And one of the things that I also kind of find interesting here is, we have the US on the far left, but I would actually argue that Hoosiers and Midwesterners are a little bit more towards the center. So think of, maybe you see an old colleague. Maybe you don't really like this old colleague, but you bump into them at Starbucks and you both say, "Oh, hey, oh, it was so great to see you. Man, we should totally catch up sometime." "Yeah, we should totally catch up. Yeah, we'll talk." You both kind of know that you're not going to do that. So that's a good example of that a little bit more high context situation. It's kind of those niceties, right? So how do you interact with this? So here are a couple of tips. If you are low context, which you're American, so you probably are, when you're dealing with people that are a little bit more high context, avoid those yes and no questions, okay? So ask open-ended questions and then clarify as much as possible. Also, always try to stay positive. Try to be self-deprecating. It's okay to say, "Hey, I might just be an ignorant American here, but can you help me understand what you're thinking and how you're feeling?" Um, the other thing that I would also mention here, especially in a business context, is those folks that are high context are going to be a little bit more wary of anything in writing and contracts. So it's always important, if you are moving forward with contracts and writing and kind of formal agreements, explain what that purpose is. So again, with some of these more high context nations or those markets that have a little bit more government instability, there could be a level of mistrust or distrust of anything government related. So whereas here, it's okay to sign these, 20-page agreements for this, and they're asking for your social security for that. Some of these markets are going to be a little bit more skeptical about that. So if you are working with these folks, always explain what the purpose of any contract is. So any questions on communication? If not, I will keep moving forward. All right. The next one is evaluation. So evaluation, let's think of kind of direct negative feedback and indirect negative feedback. So unsurprisingly, direct negative feedback to a colleague is provided very frankly. It's very blunt. It's very honest. So negative messages stand alone, and they're not going to be softened by any positive ones. So you use these absolute descriptions when criticizing, and criticism can be given to an individual in front of a group. On the other side to this, we have negative feedback, which would be indirect, which is provided a lot more softly, a lot more subtly, and positive messages are used to wrap with negative ones. So you use qualifying descriptors, and you would only criticize someone in private, never in front of a group. So again, another kind of Americanism that you can think about here is, think about if you were, the stereotype of walking in New York City and you bump into someone, they might yell at you, "Hey, get out of the way, you jerk." But here in the Midwest, in Indiana, you bump into someone, you both kind of go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Excuse me. I'm so sorry." You're both sort of apologizing to each other. So that both kind of apologizing is very indirect. I mean, you're both sort of explaining that you shouldn't be doing this, but it's not as direct in terms of that negative feedback. Another thing that Americans really, really like to do, which confuses a lot of Europeans, are the feedback sandwich. So if you think of any good sandwich, you have both of the bread, which would be those positive messages. So let's say we're criticizing someone. It's, "Man, you did such a great job here. Maybe next time, you could think about doing this, but again, super job." Having things wrapped up like that can be very confusing to those people that are focused on that direct negative feedback. So think of the Germans, think of the French. And a lot of times, if an American is criticizing that way, they are actually going to think that it's a positive message that, hey, everything went well, everything is great. They're complimenting me, everything is good. So the thing to always understand when it comes to indirect negative feedback is those subtle suggestions are often a command. So those, "You might want to consider next time, maybe think about," that is a command. Next time, do it. Next time, do it. Um, so again, these folks that are on the right side of the spectrum that are very indirect negative feedback focus, they want to save face. Now, the concept of saving face is really common, especially with East Asian cultures, and that's really about maintaining and preserving your own self-worth. So you would never, ever, ever um, embarrass someone in front of a group of people, because that perception of weakness, you could lose respect not only with that individual, but all the team members below them. So how things are often done is through the channels. So you may talk behind someone's back. You may, talk to the secretary, someone below them at the level, but you would never, ever, ever criticize someone in public with that. So I'll give you a couple of tips on how to interact with people on both sides. So again, those people, the Japan, the China, the East Asia, and some of the Middle East, again, you would never criticize indirect feedbackers in public. Um, so if you're, working with different partners and there's those little flare-ups that often occur, just understand that you would want to talk to these people aside. You would never in a group meeting, never in a Zoom, anything like that, talk about anything negative. So a couple of other things to kind of consider and where people fit into all of this is those people on the left, those direct negative feedback people use upgraders. So instead of being upset, they would use totally upset, absolutely upset, these huge grandiose sort of black and white, it's either all or nothing. Whereas those people that use a lot of indirect negative feedback would say slightly, maybe next time, a little bit. So again, that soft and subtle approach. So again, the main thing here to take away, because again, Americans are a little bit in the middle, and Midwesterners, I would argue, are a little bit more indirect, is that when you're dealing with European partners, understand that using those feedback sandwiches and wrapping those positive messages into the negative messages can be very confusing. So it's okay to be upfront and a little bit more blunt with them when it comes to you're unhappy about the language of a contract or you're unhappy about a supplier relationship. It's okay to be direct with them. So next slide. Leading. Another one that's can be very fun for a lot of Americans and comparing and contrasting. So this is going to focus a lot more on kind of the flatness and then also the pyramid shape. So we have egalitarian and hierarchical structures for this. So egalitarian, of course, is flat. It emphasizes equal participation, decentralized authority, open communication, and then reducing disparities among members, focusing on a collaborative atmosphere where decisions are made collectively. Now, hierarchical structures, on the other hand, feature a centralized authority and top-down decision-making, formal roles, and a clear chain of command. So the one thing to understand when you're dealing with folks, because Americans are a little bit more to the left, is the importance of parity, especially when it comes to business meetings. So a good example of this is with ACSI, we brought in someone from a provincial level government, basically a state level government from China to purchase like a ridiculous amount of soybeans in Indiana. Now, when we explained who they were going to be meeting with, we had said, they're going to be meeting with the director of the Indiana State Department of Agriculture, which is the highest level person in the Department of Agriculture. But again, director in the eyes of the Chinese is kind of like mid to low, whereas like president and minister and CEO are deemed to be higher. And so the Chinese refused the meeting, even though they were literally going to be meeting with the top level people of everything. And so what we actually had to do was we took their business card from the Department of Ag and changed it in Chinese to read Minister of Agriculture. Because again, when you're dealing in group situations, you're only allowed to talk to someone of your sort of equal caste here. So if you were a manager and you're trying to, open new doors with a company in UAE or China, you're probably only going to be able to talk to another manager level. So always use that to your advantage in that, if you are going to a trade show, having the president title or having, a more higher level title can help open a lot more doors for you. Now, on the other side, we have a lot of Scandinavian countries, which are the epitome of egalitarian. And so dealing with some of these folks, understand that level hopping can be very common. So, you could have an intern and a CEO be okay with talking with one another. So there aren't going to be those chains of commands. And, one of the things that can be really uncomfortable for those people that are much more hierarchical is the, concept of going behind someone's back. If someone below me is talking to the president and CEO, it's like, well, that's not appropriate. They should go through me first. But with egalitarian, especially the Scandinavians and the Swedes, the Danes, the Norwegians, it's okay. You can have that direct communication, and the CEO is just like any other person. It's not a title. They're just one of the guys. So another thing that I just really wanted to quickly mention too is when dealing with people that are from those markets that are much more hierarchical, the boss is required, and I can't emphasize enough this, but required to look the part. And that means, wearing a suit. It means acting professional, being professional. And it brings great shame in these parts of the world that if the head person isn't taking things seriously or is being a little bit more lackadaisical or being complacent, because in their view, that head boss represents everyone below them. So, if you're a small company and you're looking to go to China and you're thinking about just wearing a polo or, shorts or anything like that, absolutely do not do that. You always, always, always have to look the part, especially if you're representing an entire company. Next slide. Perfect. The next one I think is really interesting, is consensual versus top-down in terms of decision making. So, of course, consensual decisions are made in groups through unanimous agreement, whereas top-down are made by individuals. Now, of course, top-down, usually the CEO gets what they want. Authority and parity is always going to be important. And so, think about like with Americans, it's usually, once a decision is made, we move forward. So united we stand, divided we fall. So a decision is made, we all got to come together and move forward with it. Whereas consensual requires a lot of planning, a lot of discussions, a lot of meetings beforehand. Whereas, folks that are much more kind of top down, it's okay to make mistakes along the way, right? So one thing that I think is really interesting here is look where Japan is. So a lot of the other East Asian countries are going to be much more focused on that top down. So dealing with Chinese and China, I can without a doubt say that the CEO typically gets what they want and things can move very lightning quick, one decision maker, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas Japan is incredibly consensual. And Peter, if you don't mind going back to the previous slide just for a second, you would think that this would mirror very closely to leading in terms of hierarchy, top-down decision making, and it should be equal here because China and Japan are pretty similar. But again, go to the next slide. We're on complete opposite spectrums here. So how does this happen? So apart with Japan decision making with them, there's I think it's called Ringu, the way that decisions are made. So typically what happens is maybe those front line managers will all come together and they sit down and talk about a problem. Okay, well, we're really having a hard time with selling these widgets. Maybe we can fix some of the marketing language. So they all work together and then they all make a decision, they put a rubber stamp on it, and then they raise it one level up. And then from that next level of kind of the middle managers, they all get together, review the document. Okay, this is what our team members think. What do we think? They might edit it up, and then they do another rubber stamp, and then they go up a line. So understand that when you're dealing with folks that are hierarchical, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be top down in their decision making. And so when you are dealing with people that make these consensual decisions, just be patient. Understand that it takes time. You have to focus on building allies. Everyone needs to have buy-in on this. It's not one of those that you can come up with a proposal and get it done really quick. And then because Americans, again, are a little bit more towards the middle, you're dealing with people that are really hierarchical. Understand that you do have to be flexible. You have to understand that decisions can be made very, very quickly, and that typically the boss calls the shots. So next slide. Scheduling. This is always a really good one, especially when you're working with businesses all across the world. So again, unsurprisingly, Americans, are very linear in the way that we approach time. So linear, again, project steps are approached in a very sequential fashion. So you complete one task and then you move on to the next one. No interruptions. You focus on the deadline. You stick to the schedule. You emphasis on promptness and good organization over flexibility. On the other side, you have the flexible time folks, which projects are approached in a more fluid manner. You can change tasks as opportunities arise. You deal with many things all at once. You can interrupt, but it's focused on adaptability and flexibility here. So again, Americans live and die by our calendars. It's one of those where, we said we were going to do this right at 12. This webinar, we do it right at 12. But in other parts of the world, it could be, well, we'll wait until we have at least 40 people, maybe at least 45 people log on until we actually get things moving. So surprisingly, rather unsurprisingly, those that are linear do not like when things come up unexpectedly. And that is what happens a lot with folks on the right-hand side. Now, one thing that you can kind of gather in terms of the information here is if you look at those countries on the left, a lot of those are those main industrial countries, right? Germany, Japan, USA, Western Europe, where things and government structures and everything is much more predictable and timely. Because you look at China, you look at Brazil, you look at the Middle East, where governments have typically not been as standardized, or sometimes things come in flux, and so they have been conditioned to respond to changes and understand that, okay, well, we thought everything was going to be fine, but then there was a coup, and then this person was ousted, and then now this happened. So they've been conditioned to be flexible when it comes to a lot of things. So another part of this, especially dealing with Chinese, is the concept of points in time versus kind of that linear approach. So again, flexible, think of multiple points in time. I was in Anderson, Indiana, talking with a Chinese company, and then actually my current boss at the time, Martin Beyer, called me up and said, "Colin, you have some Chinese people here to see you." And I said, "What Chinese people?" And of course, I'm frantically checking my phone. Did I miss a text? Did I miss a call? Did I miss an email? No. These people just flew in from China to come meet with me without any heads up. So the next morning, I met with them and talked with them. You know, I had a bit of relationship building with T, and I had asked, "Why are you here?" And they said, "Well, yeah, good question. So we're here for the week, and I need to find a lawyer, I need to find a banker, I need to find an accountant, and I also need to find a warehouse by Friday. Can you help us?" It's like, okay, sure. Why are you here now? Why all of a sudden? It's like, well, we're from Hangzhou, China. Hangzhou, China is sister cities to Indianapolis, Indiana. So we thought that we would be welcome here. And we heard about your organization, so we thought that you'd be able to get all of this done for us right now. And so that could be a lot, right? And so think of, Americans where sometimes if you're really busy, you're thinking, 3 or 4 weeks out in terms of scheduling some of these things. But again, when it comes to business in these parts of the world, things happen now in the present. And the other thing that I can't stress enough here is with contracts that again, those folks that are linear time, your Germans, your Americans, Japanese, they understand that contracts are basically bound, for perpetuity. Whereas those that are much more on the right-hand side look at this as a point in time. And so it was quite common in China that, two companies would be able to make an agreement with one another, and then the Chinese would basically change the entire contract around, and the Americans would say, "Well, what's going on here?" Like, "Well, but that was last year, and this year economic conditions aren't as good. We have more inflation, so we just decided to change everything." So always, one, do your homework. Always have check-ins with these folks and understand that things can be a little bit more unpredictable. So next slide. All right. Here's another good compare and contrast between kind of the Western world and the Eastern world, trusting. So this is going to be tasks versus relationships. So with task, trust is built through business-related activities. So work relationships are built and drop pretty easily, and it's based on practicality of the situation. Whereas relationships and relationship-based folks trust is built through sharing emails, evening drinks, spending time with one another. Relationships are built up slowly and over the long term, so that once you can trust the person, you can trust the work here. So again, Americans are going to be pretty pragmatic, probably one of the most pragmatic nations in the world, whereas Asians typically work with people that they know. So, a good example here is tomorrow we have an event at the State House and I need to buy catering, right? So I'm an American, so I think, all right, so what's my budget? Who can get it to me quickly? Who can get it to me cheaply? And then I just move forward with that. Now, if I were to put on my Chinese hat on, I would call up my friends and call up my colleagues. Who have you worked with before? Who do you trust? Who do you know? Who has the best tasting food? Things like that. So these business decisions are often made through people you know. So um, one thing that I always want to emphasize here is if you are looking to build relationships and business relationships with those focused on the right, understand it's going to take some time. And it can't be done just via Zoom. It can't be done just via email. You have to spend time with these folks, and you need to try and make personal connections as much as possible. So some good suggestions for that is someone muted me. Someone wants me to shut up. All right. So always try and focus on building personal relationships with people. So music and sport are always good things to do. Also, don't be afraid to show your non-professional self. So it's not always about wearing the suit in a business meeting. It's about going for drinks afterwards. It's about having dinners. It's about getting to know the people. So be authentic. Focus on that. And that's going to be a really good key takeaway here. Slide. I'm just going to go a little bit quick through these next two because I've already been muted once. So the next thing to consider is disagreeing, confrontational versus avoid confrontation. So this goes back to one of the elements that we talked a little bit about earlier in terms of negative feedback. But with confrontation, in those countries that are confrontational, disagreement and debate are positive for the team and organization, and open confrontation is appropriate and will not negatively impact the relationship. Whereas those that avoid confrontation, disagreement, debate are negative, obviously, and open confrontation is inappropriate and will break group harmony. So again, this goes back to that concept of saving face. It's about understanding there's a time and a place which you can disagree. But again, when you're dealing with those folks that are avoiding confrontation, always make sure that you don't do anything in public. Another thing here to kind of consider, since Americans are a little bit in the middle, um, typically Americans take things very personally, right? So, if I were to, get frustrated with someone and about work performance, Americans typically, oh, well, they're attacking me as a person. Oh, they don't like me. Whereas, Germans and the French, they do that all the time, but they can separate that. That's your work performance and who you are as a person are not these are two different types of people here. Um, Another thing that I want to mention here, and this is especially for those folks that maybe have partners or employees or other contacts in parts of the world like Japan, like China, like the UAE, asking their opinion can come across as feeling confrontational. Like they're being put on the spot, especially in group settings. So again, in confrontational parts of the world, like France or Germany, if everyone's sitting at a table, it's okay if you say, oh, I disagree with this. This is not a good idea. I really think we should do this. And then if the boss were to ask opinions, it's encouraged and expected that uh, those pieces of feedback are given. Whereas, again, on those avoidance countries, uh, do not ask for their opinion because they're not going to give it to you because they want to make sure that they maintain that level of harmony. So the best thing that we can recommend for you is say you are, C-suite person and you're talking to a group of directors and you're asking for their opinion, they're not giving it to you. Ask someone who you trust as a director level to speak with them on that director level to keep that level of parity. Because again, when you're dealing with these avoidance confrontation, they typically are very hierarchical too. So you would never disagree with the boss, right? But it's okay to talk to your colleagues and kind of your equals about what some situations are here. Another thing that I just want to quickly mention before we move on to the next one is with those avoidance confrontation people, no communication is the biggest red flag that you can get because a lot of times they're going to avoid the issues at all costs. So if you are dealing with a supplier in China or a partner in the Middle East and they just stop talking to you, that is a big red flag. Get on a plane, try and call them, try to do anything that you can to try and get what the root of the issue is. Because if you just avoid it and just expect that they're going to come to you when there's a problem, it's just not going to happen. Okay, very lastly, persuading principles versus applications. So think of this as more kind of marketing to these markets, right? So if you are trying to market to the French and the Germans, understand that you have to focus on the logical side. So principles, think of logic, the why, the theoretical, the hypothesis testing, the explanations. Whereas if you are trying to market your goods to those countries on the far right, it's much more principled. It's kind of the pragmatic side of it. It's the conclusions, the executive summary, it's the bullet points. How do we do this? Let's just quickly get to the point. Best example of this is this program today. I quickly just mentioned who the deck is. I can quickly mention who International Center is, who myself is, who Aaron Pyre is, and then we just move forward with it. And you all probably, some of you may disagree with me and think that I'm full of BS, but for the most part, Americans kind of just go with the flow, trust, we're going to move forward. It's okay. If I were to be speaking to French, if I was to be speaking to the Germans, I would have spent 80% of my time on this presentation talking about the research methodology of how Aaron Meyer got these results, and then probably spend 10 minutes or so going through all of these slides. So understand that when you're trying to market to these people, you have to explain the why. Now, another thing that I want to mention, especially when it comes to American marketing, we typically are very grandiose, right? So we're very, we are the best company. We are number one. My county is the best place to live. And the majority of the world thinks that's BS, right? So when you are trying to market yourselves or your companies over there, avoid these grandiose statements as much as possible. If you have some type of statement, you have to be able to, from a qualitative and quantitative perspective, to be able to back that up. So it's okay to say that you're number one and whatever, but you have to have citations that can help reinforce that behavior. Now, you may also be wondering, where's China in this? Where's Japan in this? Well, they're a little bit different because they don't necessarily have principled versus applications. They're much more holistic, right? So they appeal to the big picture and not just the individual. So again, you know, if you're looking at this, Americans are very individualistic. A lot of Western Europe is very individualistic. But again, in East Asia and really all of Asia, but specifically in East Asia, it's about harmony. It's about the group itself. So if you're marketing to these types of folks, understand that you're trying to market to the bigger picture. It's not just about making one person rich or making one company, but how does this look in the long term? How does this fit into the grand scheme of things? So you have to be able to be prepared for that. So with that, I will conclude my portion of our discussion, and then my colleague Peter Kirkwood, who is our Chief of Protocol, will talk a little bit about protocol and etiquette.
Thank you, Colin. So we define protocol as the art of creating a distraction-free environment that helps facilitate open communication and resolve issues in international business and diplomacy. So what I'll present to you here are some key elements of protocol, because navigating the complexities of global business customs is a multifaceted endeavor. It requires a lot of careful consideration. Cultural differences in greetings, names and titles, different perceptions of time, even our attire, they underscore the importance of cultural sensitivity, as well as effective communication across language barriers. These are imperative, and we need to be able to adapt to varying behavioral norms. Following guidelines for gift giving and dining etiquette, these serve as important opportunities to show respect for cultural traditions. So in the world of global business, embracing diversity and displaying cultural awareness, it's not only essential, but it's a sign of professionalism and respect in international dealings. So we're going to look at each of these key elements here. So as we're greeting, when we're welcoming visitors, we need to consider the importance of creating an atmosphere of anticipation and warmth right there at the threshold, at the entrance to our offices. And then we embrace the chosen mode of greeting, right? Whether this is kiss, bow, or a handshake, you want to do this in a way that mirrors their gesture. Return the grip that's given is what I always recommend to people. So this signifies respect. You'll want to pay close attention to the exchange of business cards, as this ritual often carries deep cultural meaning in places like in East Asia. And adopting a few basic phrases in your guest language, even if you're not fluent, it can have a powerful impact and demonstrate thoughtfulness and a genuine willingness to connect across language and cultural divides. Let's take a look at some specific examples. In Latin America, cheek kissing is a common and warm greeting among friends, family members, and acquaintances. The number of kisses exchanged vary by country, with some regions favoring one kiss and others 2 or even 3. Also in France, it's common to exchange 2 kisses, 1 on each cheek. But in Spain, it's a single kiss on one cheek. However, in more formal or business settings, handshakes may be the preferred greeting. So you have to know your relationship and you have to develop in those greetings. Bowing is deeply integrated cultural practice in Japan. It signifies respect, humility, and sincerity. It plays a vital role in daily interactions, emphasizing social hierarchy and fostering harmonious relationships. Proper bowing demonstrates adherence to the cultural norms, and it's crucial for effective communication and building trust in Japanese society. Let's look at handshakes. They vary across cultures. In Western countries, a firm handshake with direct eye contact symbolizes confidence and equality. In Arab nations, handshakes are often warm and can be prolonged. This signifies hospitality. In China, a lighter and lingering handshake is common, and it's often followed by a nod, showing respect while also maintaining modesty. Moving from greetings to the topic of names and titles, it's important that we show respect in our different forms of address. As we examine this topic, I'd like to share a list of valuable tips that can help navigate the intricacies of names and titles in intercultural communication. Invest time in researching and learning about the specific customs and naming convention of your client's country or culture. This can include how names are structured, common titles, and appropriate forms of address. When in doubt, ask your international clients how they prefer to be addressed. Many individuals will appreciate your effort of not assuming and your effort to respect their preference. Err on the side of formality. Respect cultural norms. You need to be aware of cultural variations. For example, some cultures using honorifics or titles, while others prefer a more informal approach. Use those professional titles where appropriate. Familiarize yourself with the honorifics used in your client's culture, whether that's Mr. or Ms., Bonjour, Madame. In the case of Japan, it could be Sama or San. Here's some examples. In the United States, as we know, it's common for people to be quick to use first names when addressing each other, fostering a casual and friendly atmosphere. In Mexico, the use of professional titles is essential in showing respect when addressing individuals. As noted, in Japan, it's customary to use the surname followed by san as a polite form of address. That formality and respect is used in the workplace at all times. Very seldom, and only special occasions, would somebody be referred to by their given name. In the United Arab Emirates, people often address each other with full names, including titles and honorifics. This reflects the importance of tribal and family ties. And then in China, the tradition is to use the surname followed by the given name. This highlights the importance of family and personal identity within the culture. These diverse naming conventions reflect the unique cultural norms and values of each country. And we say the person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. So taking the time to get those right is going to make a great impression. Go a little more in depth on time management comparison. Colin touched on this. In the realm of time management, we got two fascinating cultures. You got the linear planners and the flexible navigators. Those linear planners, they're the precision engineers, ensuring every minute is accounted for in their well-structured schedules. They're like clockwork, always prompt and ready to kick off meetings with precisely rehearsed agendas. Missing a beat in their well-choreographed plan can send them into mild panic, but they keep the gears of productivity turning smoothly. On the flip side of that, we got those flexible navigators who approach time as that ever-changing river flowing with currents of opportunity and adapting their schedule on the fly. They believe in prioritizing meaningful conversations over rigid timelines and are open to adjusting plans when a detour leads to valuable insight. In business, these two personalities offer unique strengths, and we need to be able to approach each of them with an openness and adaptability. Touching on attire, looking at some do's and don'ts. One, research the culture. Before engaging with a different culture, take the time to learn about their traditions and customs. Err on the side of formality, err on the side of modesty as well. In cultures like the Middle East and India, modesty is valued. It's a safe choice to opt for clothing that's not revealing or excessively light. Follow those specific dress codes. Seek advice. If you're unsure about appropriate attire, consider asking someone from the culture or a local representative for advice. Don't make any assumptions. Don't assume that all cultures have the same dress requirements. That's where that research comes into play. Don't wear costumes as everyday attire. You need to be able to distinguish between what's appropriate for cultural events and everyday clothing. Along those lines, avoid excessive cultural appropriation. Don't be judgmental or mock others as well. It's important to respect and appreciate the diverse customs, even if they're unfamiliar to you. Remember, the key is to approach cultural situations with an open mind, respect, and willingness to learn. My notes on communication here. I want to talk a little bit about working with interpreters and translators. Most important, as you're going into international business dealings, you want to be sure to bring your own interpreters, have your own translators to do the work, and hire professionals, and don't just take somebody off the street that speaks the language. When working with interpreters, a few key considerations can greatly enhance your communication. First, steer clear of slang or idioms. Secondly, take pauses in your speech so you can provide that time for interpreters to catch up. You can take notes in between so you don't lose your spot. You want to speak to your counterpart, not the interpreter. This approach fosters a smoother and more natural exchange despite the linguistic barrier, and having that direct communication is going to help build those relationships. Some do's and don'ts on behavior. When we're navigating these cross-cultural interactions, we need to lean towards formality, as I've noted. A few typical situations to look at for do's and taboos is avoid disrespecting or mocking religious or spiritual beliefs. Be cautious when discussing sensitive topics related to religion, including rituals and symbols. Be aware of personal space and touching. Gender roles and expectations differ across cultures, so be aware of cultural norms regarding appropriate behavior between genders. There's certain taboos around body parts as well. So for example, in the Middle East, you'd want to keep your feet on the floor. You don't expose the bottom of your foot. And these kinds of gestures and body language are important to be aware of before you go. Avoid topics related to politics and sensitive history. And it's important to note that you need to be cautious with humor. Jokes and comedic styles can be culturally specific, and they may not translate well across cultures. So, and definitely avoid jokes that are based on stereotypes or any generalizations there. One of the questions that I get asked most often is around gift giving. In global business, gift giving is a common practice. It can play a significant role in building relationships. We need to know when. The timing is crucial when presenting gifts in global business. Understanding the appropriate occasion and cultural norms is essential. We also need to know who. Identifying the right recipient. Do you need different levels of gift? One level of gift may be presented to senior executives or business partners. And then another level of gift may be presented to other individuals who've played a role in the business relationship. And then knowing what to give. Selecting appropriate gifts requires careful thought and consideration. And cultural understanding plays a crucial role in choosing a gift. It needs to align with the recipient's values, traditions, and preferences, while also representing our own culture so that we can showcase the uniqueness and foster cultural exchange in the process. looking at food and drink, as Colin mentioned, this is a great opportunity to build relationships in business and social settings. So one, be open to trying new foods. Showing an interest in local cuisine can be a great way to build rapport with business partners. Observe the local etiquette, using dining as an opportunity to network and build relationships. So be prepared to engage in both professional and personal conversations and look for those opportunities to accept invitations. Don't just go back to your hotel room because you're going to be missing out on one of the key aspects. Show respect for local dietary restrictions or preferences, and you want to accommodate dietary requirements as you're hosting as well, such as vegetarian, vegan, halal, kosher options when you're hosting or attending business meetings. Don't assume your cultural norms around food and drink are universally applicable. Don't discuss sensitive topics during your meals. Don't criticize or express dislike for local foods or drinks. Even if something's unfamiliar or unappetizing, it's important to maintain a polite and respectful attitude towards it. So if you can be complimentary, that's going to be your best option there. Quick anecdote before we go to Q&A here. During my visit to Hangzhou, China, I found myself in a local restaurant. I'm exploring the city's renowned cuisine, and I had the opportunity to try duck tongue. My host, inquired, what I thought of it, and my first kind of gut response was, "It's not my favorite." Immediately, I realized my mistake. So I tried another one and said, "Hey, I think I kind of like it." Then I tried another one. It's like, I think this is my new favorite. Had I just been complimentary at the first go, I could have saved a couple of ducks in the process. So with that, I'll end the slide here, and we'll look to take any questions from you.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much, Peter. Any questions that people have, whether it's any of the dimensions, maybe you're looking to build relationships in a specific market, or you're looking to travel, what can we answer for you all?
Now's your opportunity. All your burning questions. Oh, looks like we've got one in the chat here.
Mr. Andrank, I don't know who that is. It's Andrew Ranke. Andrew asks, and I will open it up for all of us. Over the past few years, I've seen increased interest in the Middle East from Indiana exporters, with many planning trips there in the coming year, specifically to the Gulf Coast countries, with vast projects planned throughout the GCC, including Saudi's $500 billion NEOM project, City of the Future. What are some of the cultural do's and don'ts of the GCC, and do they vary somewhat from country to country within the GCC? So I will get started here. One of the hard things, when we sort of talk about, a region, right, is there's always so much regionalism that exists, and especially in parts of the world which are kind of dealing with the ramifications of colonialism, right? So one is just always having that cultural sensitivity, right? So part of it may not be, specific to, they may not have that pride to the country or to the state, and maybe to their, religious minority, things like that. The other thing that I think is always really important too is, focusing on that relationship building. Really throughout all of Asia, people want to do business with those people that they know. So just knowing that a lot of times it can take time, and the one thing that I see a lot of when it comes from the business perspective is Americans want to do things quickly. And I remember a couple of both companies and economic development officials that would talk to me and say, "I need, a Chinese business to come here in the next year, otherwise I'm out." It's like, you cannot have that short-term view that Americans have. It has to be longer term. You have to understand that you need to put the time and make sure that you always do your homework. Let's see, we have a few
Yeah.
other
While you're doing
questions.
that, I'll just add a note of relationship building in the Gulf Coast countries. There's a lot of family ties, so business is tied to family, so understanding the importance of working with the companies, partners, and being open to the relationships that exist in that ecosystem is important. Again, doing that kind of research, ahead of time, knowing that there's variation in gender roles, and don't go in with those assumptions, because we're seeing a lot of progressive countries in the Gulf Coast that are Gulf Coast countries that are making leaps and bounds of changes in that area as well.
Okay, Colin, do you see that one about the juxtaposition?
That I do, so I'll just read it out. So how have you seen the juxtaposition in terms of confrontation at dining? If a guest in a less confrontational culture, would it generally be seen as impolite to invite others to dine with you, if not invited yourself? So, kind of yes and no. One of the things that, generally in those indirect countries, they're also very focused on relationship building, and it's important for them to build those relationships outside of work. And so recently we were working with a Chinese national that had taken an assignment here in Greenwood, Indiana for 6 months. And it was one of those that she assumed that she would be able to, have dinners with her colleagues and work, you know, friends and things like that. But here in America, it's just one of those where we have those boundaries, right? So we have this concept of a peach and a coconut. So Americans are peaches. So think of a peach. It's very juicy on the outside, but it has that really hard pit. So at any given time, especially in the Midwest, we're so nice, when you first meet people, very friendly to strangers and everything is good. But we also have that very dark, kind of hard pit inside that we reserve just for family, right? Okay. Now, Asian cultures are the opposite. They're the coconut. So they have a very thick exterior, so it's harder to warm up to them. But then once you build a relationship, you have that milky center, which lasts forever. And so part of that issue is when you're sort of in that juxtaposition of trying to navigate between peaches and coconuts, because again, a coconut realizes it takes time to build relationships. You need to have those dinners. You need to do that. But the Americans are like, no. At 5 p.m., I am out of here. Like, I am not sticking around. We're not getting drinks afterwards. So there can be a little bit of miscommunication there, but it's always important to try and meet in the middle, right? So if you're trying to have someone, for dinner, always give someone an out, right? So if they can't do it this time, would they like to do it next week? But if they just say that they're too busy, well, then you sort of have to read the writing on the wall, which is they're probably not interested. But just being able to pick up on those cues and understand what those dynamics look like are important.
Moving on down, Colin, Matt asked about building presenting argumentation across cultures. Can you show the slide again?
Yeah. Peter's already on it. He already said that one.
On it.
But that's a good thing to just kind of reemphasize too, that the way in which you persuade someone and you market to someone is always going to be really critical when you're working across cultures. Right now, with the International Center, we're working a lot with a lot of the Korean companies and expatriates coming into the Kokomo region, so greater north central Indiana. And the way that you market to those folks is going to be incredibly different than the way that you market to Americans. And so we see this a lot where, American firms are just sort of used to like, well, we just translate everything. We Google Translate it and it's going to work. And it's like, no. You have to understand, in their minds, they need much more convincing from the beginning. They need, different ways in which you organize the material. But the best thing to always focus on is the slide that Peter had said, that, especially with those French and Germans where you have to explain the why, that make sure that you have those parameters set 100%. Because if you go into a presentation and you just get into the what and not focus on the why, you're immediately going to be discounted.
Thank you, Colin. Looks like Eric had a comment in the Middle East. In the late evening, the Diwanya with the family elders and drinking tea, not talking or taking business or talking business is what builds trust in relationships. It's not done from the office. or during business meetings. So
Yeah.
that's
And
a nice comment.
And that's a really great comment too, because when you are having, trying to break bread with someone and build a relationship, it's not about the business, right? I don't play golf, I play soccer, but I can only imagine if you're, in this one of those golf meetings, you're probably chit-chatting about work and maybe talking about the next deal to try and win that over. In a lot of parts of the world, you are not talking about that. So you may be meeting someone because of business. You may be trying to get a contract or some type of relationship with them. But the purpose of those dinners, the purpose of those drinks is to get to know the person, not the business. Because if you trust the person, then the business comes afterwards. So I can't emphasize enough that when you are talking to these folks, do not use that as your sales pitch time. That's not what it's about. It's about to get to know the person and for that person to get to know you as a person.
All right. This has been a great discussion today. We want to say thank you. There may be other questions, and I assume that that Colin and Peter would be willing to take those offline. We want to be respectful of everyone's time today. It's a fascinating discussion. I think we could go many different directions with this type of a topic. Anybody that's traveled to a foreign country has probably experienced a bit of cognitive dissonance of trying to figure out where am I and what should I do. I think the tips we've learned today will help us navigate some of these foreign waters to many of us. We want to say thank you to our presenters, Colin Rank and Peter Kirkwood from the International Center. Great presentations. Thank you, Colin, as a deck member for leading off. We have a few more on the line. I saw Christine Everett. I saw Lloyd Porter. There may be others I didn't see in the chat. So thanks to any and all deck members that have joined already. And then thanks to you, our audience. And thanks to you, our audience, for being here today. Our next Lunch and Learn is scheduled for November. And the topic of the day right now would be on Japan. So we look forward to seeing you all there, and we hope you've enjoyed the presentation today. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out to me, to our deck chair, Andrew Renke, or to any other deck members about these topics. This has been really interesting, and I hope everyone found it educational and enjoyable. And we want to say thank you for your time today. We wanted to sign off now. Have a great day. Bye now.